Pastor Ken coming to you with another Q&A video. Today I believe I have a very interesting Q&A session for you. The question is who are the spirits who are in prison, and what was their sin? Who are the spirits who are now in prison, and what was their sin? Well, to answer this question, we first begin in 1 Peter chapter 3, and we're going to look at verses 18 through 20. Okay, 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 through 20. And this is what it says. It says, "For Christ also died for sins, once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which, by the Spirit, okay, he went and he made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water." So we're being told of a time in the days of Noah that there were these spirits, okay, who are now imprisoned, that Jesus went and made a proclamation to, okay? Now, I believe that Jesus made this proclamation between his death and his resurrection. Now, the proclamation wasn't giving these spirits a second opportunity to salvation, but he was proclaiming rather their judgment and his victory on the cross. So there are certain spirits here that we are told in this verse that are now in prison. These ones, they were disobedient in the time of Noah. Now it says specifically here, when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark. Now that's going to be important afterwards when we get into Genesis 6 to remember that point, okay? So I want us now just to go over to now 2 Peter chapter 2. 2 Peter 2, we're going to go into chapter 2, verses 4 and 6. And here it says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but he cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the earth of the ungodly. And if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by the reducing them to ashes, having made them an example to those who live ungodly lives thereafter." And then he keeps continuing here. But he talks here in verse 4, he mentions that if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, okay, some believe that this is speaking about when angels rebelled with Satan. I believe it's speaking about something more specific, a more specific sin that they did commit, which we're going to get into in a minute. So, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell, committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment." So there are, again, here we have spirits in prison from 1 Peter. Then in 2 Peter, we have angels who sinned, okay, who have been cast into hell. And the actual word there is not hell, the lake of fire. It's actually literally a place called Tartarus. Okay, this is a prison that these spirits are in. They're locked up in chains right now until they receive their final judgment. Okay? Now, so, he didn't spare these angels. They committed some kind of sin which caused them to be locked up here in Tartarus. Now, let's turn over to Jude, and we're going to look in verse 6. Jude gives us some further information on this. I'm going to go from verses 5 all the way through 7. It says, "Now I desire to remind you, though you know all things once for all, that the Lord, after saving a people out of the land of Egypt, subsequently destroyed those who did not believe, and angels who did not keep their own domain, but they abandoned their proper abode, and he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they in the same way as they indulged in gross immorality, and they went after strange flesh, are exhibited as an example in the undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. Okay, there's a lot said here. Verse 6, there are angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode. And so here it is again, in prison, or, they're locked up. Okay, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. So they're in these bonds, they're imprisoned until the judgment, until they face their final judgment. But notice what it says here. Just as Sodom, Gomorrah, okay, Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since in the same way they indulged in what? Gross immorality, and they went after strange flesh, okay? Now, I believe that this also connects with verse 6, speaking about these angels who left their own domain and they abandoned their proper abode, okay? Now, this sin was so horrific to God that God has locked these ones up already, and they're in Tartarus, and they're waiting their final judgment. Now, the sin is comparable to the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. And what was that? Gross immorality. They went after strange flesh. And we know the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was what? Homosexuality. So men were going after men. You could include lesbianism and that, women going after women. Okay? That is not the way God designed it, is it? No. Men are to be with women and women are to be with men. Well, the same way, angels are not to be with to go with human women or anything like this, or anything like this. Now, I just kind of blew it right there for what's coming up in Genesis. But these angels, they committed a terrible sin that they are now locked up in chains. So since I already blew it, let's go over to Genesis chapter 6, and let's look at verses 1 through 5. Genesis 6, 1 through 5. What is this sin that these spirits committed? It says, now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. There were Nephilim on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Okay, so we have this statement here in verse 2, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose. Then it says down in verse 4, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bore children unto them. Okay, so now there's differences of beliefs here, differences of interpretation here. Some people believe that these sons of God are the godly line of Seth. Others believe that it's referring to kings and that and their descendants. But what I believe, and a lot of scholars believe this, is that the sons of God are referring to angels. They're referring to the fallen angels who rebelled, who left their abode, okay? And they came down and they took wives. And really, it's really talking about that they forcefully took these women, okay, for themselves, took wives, as it says. And it says that because they were intimate with them. And these women, they bore children. And as a result of this, as this sin, there's this coming together of angels with the human women, and they're giving birth to children. And it says that the earth is just filled with wickedness, with evil and violence. And it says that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually of men. Okay, so it was so sinful. Men were just constantly thinking of sinful things, doing sinful things. So something here happened so terrible that God locked up is we're looking at all these verses that God locked up these certain angels in prison until they are awaiting their judgment. Some of these fallen angels are still free, are still loose, but there's certain ones who have been put in prison. So I believe that the sons of God here is referring to these fallen angels who rebelled, left their abode. They came down, they forcefully took women as wives and bare children unto them. And God seen it that this sin was so awful, and that he even said that it was comparable to the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. What did they do? Again, immorality, and they went after strange flesh, just as these angels did. Some people don't believe that this is speaking about angels when it refers to the sons of God, but all throughout the Old Testament, whenever that reference is made, the sons of God, it's referring to angels. So some will say, because of what Jesus said, that angels are not given in marriage. Okay, well, in their proper state, they aren't. Okay, but don't forget, these guys did something that was so despicable in the eyes of God, something that was so evil and terrible in the eyes of God, that he has already chained them up in Tartarus, and they're just waiting their judgment. And so I believe that it's these angels who came down. So they're already locked up in prison, waiting their final judgment. Okay, so hopefully that helps you. I know a lot of people have that question a lot of times. So who are these spirits in prison? And what was their sin? Their sin was that they left their abode and they came down and they intermingled, married, and that with the daughters of men, and had children with them, filled the whole earth with violence. And remember that verse, I think it was back in Peter, when it says, in the time of Noah, in the time of the patience of God. Well, right here, when God was saying, or here in the verse, it was saying that my spirit shall not strive with man forever, but he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. Because of this event, because of this sin that took place, God said, I will not be patient. I will not strive with them forever. I'm limiting their days to 120. Now, that is not lifespan that he's talking about. He's not talking about their lifespan. He's saying that they have 120 years to repent, and then judgment will come upon them. Okay, and I know there's many today who are saying, they take this verse and say that man should live 120 years, should be perfectly healthy and all that. No, that's not what this is speaking of. This is speaking of that they have 120 years to repent, and then the judgment will come. So again, hopefully that this helps you understand what this means, who these spirits in prison are, and what their sin was. So keep watching for more of these videos. God bless you.